Okay, now I can start. So welcome everyone. We have the pleasure of having Senjuti, let me know if I pronounce it right, your name, here with us today. Senjuti has a background in microbiology, and she works at the intersection of clinical microbiology and global health as a scientist at the Child Health Research Foundation in Bangladesh. She did her PhD in molecular genetics in Canada and moved back to Bangladesh to pursue a career that tries to bring together basic science with public health. Her work is marked by her goal of advancing the cause of health and research equity in the world. And she has a special focus on pediatric preventable diseases, such as understanding the roles of vaccines in the overall health systems. So thank you again for Senjuti. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. I'll transfer back to you. Let me know if you want to correct anything that I said about you, or if you want to add anything. Thank you again, and we're gonna have a great talk today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ricardo, for that introduction. It was perfect. I have nothing to add, but I will say it is an absolute pleasure to be here tonight and speak to all of you guys about one of the global health topics that's very close to my heart, something that we think about, talk about every day. So I am going to share my screen and start talking. Okay.
Annette is just connecting now.
I see Annette. Hi, Annette. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So what I want to talk about today is kind of reflected on my title. We decided that we'll talk about inequity in access to vaccines, specifically COVID-19 vaccines. However, if we look at inequity, if we look at history of global health and birth of global health, I think it becomes very clear what we are seeing with COVID-19 is just a mirror of decades of inequity that we have seen in access to vaccines. So before we go into lecture, let's try to understand the term equity. So this is a picture that depicts equality, right? Everyone here, every kid or an adult of different heights gets a stool of the same height. And for some, it works. For the tallest, it's perfectly fine. They can watch over the fence. They can watch the game. For a little kid or a neonate, let's say, a stool is of the same height is not going to work. But we were equal, right? We gave everybody the exact same stool. What's equity? Equity basically means we give people according to their need. So if a child needs a stool that's much higher to watch the game and have the same experience as the person in the middle or the tallest person, then that person should get the stools of the maximum height. So this is kind of, I really like this illustration. I found it on Twitter, and I think this is a really good illustration that shows the difference between equality and equity. But what is reality? This is what reality looks like, right? The richest get the most, the poorest or the shortest in this case get the least. And sometimes they get trapped into this vicious cycle that even what they get cannot be used for several social determinants. So these are the concepts that we're going to touch upon today. I want to start with a data slide, and I want to start with a slide of a vaccine. This vaccine is called Haemophilus influenzae type B vaccine, or HIB vaccine. HIB is a bacteria that causes meningitis. That's an infection of the brain. It can cause sepsis, infection of the blood. It can cause also pneumonia, severe pneumonia. HIB infections can be very dangerous. If it does infect our brain, children usually die within hours before they can even get treatment. So prevention is kind of the only strategy. So you can, what I'm showing you on this graph is on the y-axis, you see all the numbers of cases of children who had Hib infection and were admitted in the largest pediatric hospital of Bangladesh called Dhaka Shishu Hospital. And on the x-axis, what you see is time. So in red, you see Hib, number of Hib cases every year. And in 2009, the Hib vaccine was introduced in the National Immunization Program of Bangladesh. Hib vaccine is known as one of the most effective vaccines. And you can see that very, very quickly, number of Hib cases dropped in the hospital across the country. We almost have no Hib in the country anymore, or pretty much in the world. Most countries have introduced it. So that's great news, right? Excellent vaccine. And this vaccine is estimated to prevent about 3,100 deaths of children under the age of 1 year every year. I'm talking about deaths, I'm not talking about cases. So that's huge and that's great. We're so proud that we could get this vaccine, right? But this vaccine was introduced 21 years after it was introduced in the US. That's not fair, right? Those 21 years, we basically let children die because we couldn't prevent deaths with a vaccine that was already available in the richest countries. So why did that happen? We asked ourselves. Our group was very closely involved in introduction of the vaccine, working with the government and policymakers, working with NITAG, and we got the vaccine. We worked with Gavi. But what happened? We asked ourselves, and this is the answer we came up with. Oh, there was lack of evidence. For decades, there was this idea that Hib is a disease that only affects the global north. In South Asia, in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Hib doesn't cause disease. That was wrong. It's just that people never looked for it. There wasn't diagnostic capacity to look for it. So it was actually our organization. So the founder of our organization that I will come to in a bit, CHRF, showed for the first time that Hib exists in Bangladesh. That led to more research in entire South Asia. We generated evidence, we worked with policymakers and got the vaccine. So we were like, okay, great. So it was all evidence that was missing. We had the evidence and we got the vaccine. Yes, 21 years later, but we got it. Okay, so that's a lesson we learned, and I'm going to come back to evidence in a bit. So who are we? As I go on with the lecture, this will be a little important. We are an NGO and also a not-for-profit organization. We call the Child Health Research Foundation, or CHRF, and our mission is to improve child health in Bangladesh and around the world by facilitating appropriate policy decisions through research and advocacy. What does that mean? That means we're really geared towards working in the lab, generating data and translating that data such that our policymakers can understand that data and make decisions based on the data and the evidence. And since our experience on Hib, or during our time of working with Hib, we really set up this semi-national surveillance across the country where we work with constantly, sometimes more, sometimes more, but we work constantly with 4 hospitals across Bangladesh. And as our name suggests, we work with only children, and we try to understand the burden of pneumonia, meningitis, sepsis, typhoid, etc. In these hospitals. And attached to these hospitals, we also have community surveillance. So these are just an idea of the hospitals we work with. Again, we primarily work with pediatric population, and we're also part of the WHO Global Invasive Bacterial Vaccine Preventable Disease Surveillance Network. And it was through this network that we were able to introduce the Hib vaccine. So in the surveillance program, what do? We do fever investigation. If a child is admitted with fever, we try to understand, is it any bacterial sepsis? Is it typhoid? If we find a bacterium, what are the antimicrobial properties like? We do outbreak investigation. During a dengue outbreak, chicken outbreak, what are the strains circulating? What do their genomes look like, etc. We're working very heavily on COVID now, come back to that. And we also do a lot of sequencing work to understand what causes mysterious infections. When children have meningitis or fever, we have no idea what's causing them. We try to do a little bit of detective work to understand what are the causes of diseases. And using all the data that is generated, we work with policymakers to get vaccines into the national program. We talked about Hib. Another vaccine that I will not talk about today is the pneumococcal vaccine, which was introduced in 2015. And that data for introduction also came from this surveillance network. So we generate evidence. We put our heart into generating evidence. But the question is that enough? We'll find out. So all of this work that we were doing came to a halt when COVID-19 hit. So first 3 cases in Bangladesh were detected on March 8th, 2020. And for the rest of my talk, what I will try to touch upon is how we leveraged existing capacity, built new capacity to generate real-time data for COVID, because we wanted vaccine real time. We wanted our entire population to get it because, we thought data was the only gap. I will talk about how that wasn't enough because we still don't have a large proportion of our country vaccinated. And I will also talk about what this means for us and for future of infectious diseases for countries like ours, low-income countries or lower middle-income countries. So let's talk about the COVID-19 journey. I already told you, March 8th, the first 3 cases were diagnosed. March 24th, the government reached out to us and wanted us to act as a COVID-19 diagnostic lab. We were the first non-governmental lab to start testing. We were very lucky. It was the same day that the Gates Foundation also reached out to us and said, we will fund you, enhance testing capacity as soon as possible. 24th to 29th, we did not sleep. We converted every bit of space infrastructure we have into becoming this COVID lab. By 29th, we started testing. And it was great, right? Because this is what we do. We are not an academic organization. We serve the country. So we were very scared, but we were also very grateful that we have this opportunity to serve the country. This is the time when we, of course, had no idea how the virus transmits. So you can see us in all overall suits. Now, when we set everything up in our lab for testing, we thought we really prepared to test hundreds of samples per day. We were ready to work 24 hours. So we had people designated for 8-hour shifts every day. But the issue was we were only getting 10 to 20 samples a day. This is March, early April. And that was kind of like shocking because all we are hearing around us is people are not being able to get tested. There aren't enough testing done and people are frustrated. So we asked the question of what are the barriers to testing? And we identified 3 barriers. Number one was there was this overall confusion on how and where to give samples. There was a lot of privacy issues because people didn't really know about the disease. If someone tested positive, they were being kicked out of their apartment. The landlords did not allow them to live there, for example. Doctors were sometimes not allowed in, etc. So what we did is to kind of answer some questions, we transformed. We have this huge group of community health workers who also work on the phone for phone follow-up. We basically used them to answer questions of patients. So we opened up phone lines, whatever we could, and people could call us and we could answer some questions. So here are some women who are doing that. Then we realized that we were a testing lab. We also collected some samples, but there were many other groups who wanted to collect samples and send them to us, but they had absolutely no training on how to collect the samples. At the same time, they wanted to protect themselves, but they had no training on how to use a PPE, how to dispose of PPE. So we built this training program. We trained on-site, we trained off-site on how to collect specimens, how to transport the specimens, how to use PPE, etc. And that really led to an increase in the number of samples that were coming into the lab. But the last thing that we faced is a lack of quality of samples. I don't know if I have a picture. I do have pictures over here. You can see, I'll just give an example of this. This is a Ziploc bag with 2 tubes inside, cotton stoppers. There were more sample in the Ziploc bag than in the tubes. So that is the state of the samples that were coming into, some of the samples that were coming into the lab. Over here, you see 2 sticks. They are basically from coconut trees, so leaves. There's a stick, in coconut tree leaves. Someone would be using those sticks, putting some cotton at the end, just collecting a specimen and sending it to us. It's a waste of their resources and time. It's a waste of our resources. Patients at the end of the day do not get any results. So what we did to basically solve this problem is started providing collection kits to ensure consistency. So there's an example of collection kit. There was an instruction in Bangla that people can read. It was pictorial. We gave them a tube with the media to collect the samples, a flocked swab. So all of these went to the patients, to the collection groups. So they could use this, and sample quality went up very quickly. As we were doing this, our people who worked in our labs were also getting kicked out from their houses just because they work in a COVID lab, or they had to work so much that they wouldn't be allowed to go back into their houses late at night, or they didn't have the time to go back to their houses late at night. So what we did is converted every open space, all balconies or corridors, into sleeping spaces. So we took everything from our home and we just started living in the lab. So we could, test, we could sequence. Remember, I'm saying all this because we're doing all of this, breaking all the barriers, thinking all we need is evidence. All we need is data to show the world that there is COVID in the country and this is the burden. Hundreds of samples started coming in, which meant
frozen for me. Is it frozen for you as well?
Yeah, it's frozen to me. She probably had some.
Let's wait a little bit. I hope it will solve soon. Very impressive work. Muito impressionante o que eles fizeram.
E ela e o pai, né? Parece que eles são uma dupla dinâmica lá de Bangladesh.
Ela vai voltar, eu acho. Caiu.
Vamos ver se ela consegue voltar daqui a pouco. Você nem
Desculpe aí, Ricardo, pelo pequeno atraso. Eu estava numa endless meeting, mas importante. Não tinha como sair.
Não, mas eu acabei de introduzir ela e você entrou. Logo no começo. Vamos ver se ela consegue voltar.
Espero que sim, né?
Eu preparei aqui algumas perguntas, claro que não estou anotando aqui para perguntar sobre o que ela está falando. Aí eu falei que ia fazer algumas perguntas para ela. Ela falou, mas você nem sabe o que eu vou apresentar, como é que você já tem? É só sobre
eu também tenho algumas perguntas. Eu espero que os alunos também façam algumas perguntas. Se quiserem perguntar em português, a gente traduz, não tem problema, tá?
E se tiver, eu vou checar também.
Não fiquem tímidos, por favor.
Eu vou checar pelo YouTube, porque às vezes alguém faz algum comentário por lá. Deixa eu ver se ela manda algum e-mail. Deve ter caído lá, né?
Problemas da internet. Deixa eu olhar aqui também se chegou alguma coisa. Por enquanto, não.
São 7h da noite lá, ela falou. Por enquanto, não recebi nada dela.
Eu acabei de mandar uma mensagem para ela.
Tá. E aí, eu estava pesquisando, né, o que ela já... sobre a Fundação Child Health Foundation, e aí tem uma pequena reportagem no Dhaka Tribune, que deve ser um jornalzinho lá de Dhaka, que aí fala do trabalho dela com o pai dela, que parece que o principal problema lá é você conseguir juntar dados, né, de qualidade para informar políticas públicas. Então, é impressionante ela falar que a principal barreira para você implementar vacina contra meningite por hemófilos é porque não tem evidência, não tem dados e não tem...
É impressionante. Que, na verdade, é um pretexto, né? Porque tinha evidência. O que eles estavam dizendo é que não tinha RIB lá, né? Em Bangladesh. E eles mostraram que tinha. Mas você vê como que um sistema de informação é importante, né? A gente, às vezes, não valoriza as coisas que a gente tem no Brasil, mas um bom sistema de informação é super importante.
A última aula para saúde política, para os alunos de graduação, e o tema foi vigilância epidemiológica, né? Como que, da importância de você ter um sistema de informação, e dos exemplos e tal, e realmente, eu acho que também não é tão valorizado. E o Brasil tem um sistema, né? A quantidade de informação que tem aqui para...
E a gente explora mal, né?
Ela até tenta voltar, mas está caindo.
Ela voltou.
Conectou.
Só tem que colocar ela como co-host para ela poder compartilhar. Não sei se ela já...
Ela pode compartilhar, eu coloquei aqui para...
Pode? Tá.
Hi, Senjuti. Welcome back. We're happy you're back.
Você pronuncia Senjuti. É Senjuti. Com SH.
Senjuti.
Deixa eu entrar.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I am so sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Don't worry about it. We're talking about something that you said about Bangladesh and the barriers to implementing a vaccine, and access to good, and the excuses that sometimes the government gives to not implementing policy decision.
Are you able to share your screen again?
A bit of trouble. I am not. I'm still having a lot of trouble hearing you.
Can you hear, or is it? Let me see.
Let me turn my video off. Maybe it will be better. Can you hear us now, Senjuti?
I can hear you better. Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna try to share my screen. We'll give it a shot.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
If you want to send,
okay.
if you want to send us your PowerPoint or your presentation by email, I can try to share, for us to share it here, and you.
Okay, that sounds great. So I'll actually try to share here at the same time. I'll also tell you.
Okay.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, we're starting to see your screen.
Coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, and you're able to hear me well too?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Please interrupt me if I'm not clear, and then I can try another network maybe.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So as we were talking about increasing testing capacity, breaking the barriers, and how we try to do this all within the country. Something to remember over here is that the way global health works, it really has a very colonial culture. Where data flow one direction, global south to the global north. And oftentimes we really do not end up building capacity or infrastructure within the country. So samples are often actually shipped to countries in the global north where the testing is done or the sequencing is done. But this was a situation where every country became busy with their own samples. They were, no longer required samples from the global south or data from the global south. So we were kind of left in this void. So what we had to do as a country is basically also conduct genome sequencing. For years and years, all samples were again sent out and they were sequenced outside, either in Cambridge or in Boston. So we started focusing on sequencing also. And after we published the first sequence on May 11th, 2020, it was absolutely wonderful to see that 19 to 20 other labs came together and started sequencing for the entire country. And, thousands of genomes have been sequenced. We are hosting the local next strain build, and people are constantly using it. However, constantly using it. So in just 18 months of the pandemic, we went from just one PCR lab in a country to more than 180 PCR labs, and there are many more antigen testing labs now. From one sequencing lab, we went to almost 20 sequencing labs, and all of this was done in country, building capacity within the country. However, this really did not suddenly ensure that Bangladesh will get access to the vaccines, just like a richer country who has immediate access to vaccines. So what we felt is like our hypothesis that it was only data that mattered to get a vaccine didn't really hold true. So we started thinking of why. Why? Because of neglect. Because at the end of the day, worldwide, all lives are just not equal. And it is the people in power, people most privileged, making the decisions for themselves. This is a slide from a recent paper, which really shows the inequity in vaccine access. So far, about 55% of all vaccine doses that have been administered have gone to high-income countries. And these are really people who have been fully vaccinated, so got double doses. And now, a few weeks ago, even booster doses have been approved in the US. Upper middle income countries, in upper middle income countries also, almost 50% of the population have been vaccinated, and about only 10% of the population of lower middle income countries have been vaccinated, and that's where Bangladesh really falls. And in low income countries is much, much lower. But if you think about it, the population is really the highest in low income countries and lower middle income countries. So we see this divide in equity and access to vaccines. And really, at least, during this pandemic, there wasn't lack of data, right? All countries had pretty good data to show the burden of COVID-19. Can you still hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. When we started in this pandemic, there was this thing that was on TV, on media, everywhere, where we said, we're in this together, the richest of the rich, the poorest of the poor, we are all in this together. But it was a rhetoric, because I really don't think we are in this together. And we see that in the decisions that are being made by the rich countries. At the end of the day, I think we are not in this together, and we have to fight for ourselves. I think countries in the lower income setting in the global south need to work together instead of always constantly thinking it will be donations of the rich countries that is going to help us. It is the people in power who is going to help us. So at the beginning, when vaccines started going into clinical trial, COVAX had promised 20%, promised vaccinating 20% of the lower income country population. That's billions of doses. As of September 2021, it has delivered only 280 million. That's nothing. USA had promised 1 billion during the G7 summit, but so far they've only donated 140 million doses. So even like those promises are very small to begin with, and what is being done or donated is even smaller, and like almost an insult to what we are getting. And if you look at vaccine wastage in those countries. And then, of course, there's this entire idea of IP rights, right? And IP rights have been at the choking point, even if there are waivers made into sharing some of the patents, some of the technologies. We haven't seen pretty much any transfer of the technological know-how of making mRNA vaccines. And there are these constant excuses of how difficult it is to make the vaccine. Our countries will not be able to maintain the quality. There are many African countries who are showing interest, have the infrastructure to make vaccines, but they're just not being allowed to make the vaccine. There have been no support, really, not even from philanthropic foundations. But what does this really mean? And the reason I gave that entire history of how we worked in COVID and hip vaccine is just to, bring forward the point that what we are seeing now is not new. What we are seeing now has been seen many, many times before. It's just that it's happening openly. We all have access to the information. Initially only scientists and doctors thought about it. Now the public is watching the entire show. What we are seeing in COVID, what we're experiencing in COVID is just a mirror of what we have been seeing for decades. COVID perhaps is acting as a magnifying glass for all of us, showing the inequities in health. And when we discuss it as a team, we really think, with our collaborators, with other activists in the field, we really think that none of this inequity will not end till power asymmetries end. And how do we end power asymmetries, right? By becoming independent. The reason I took you through that entire journey of COVID is, I gave an example of our organization, but it's every other organization, it's every country in the global south who has shown the impossible during this pandemic, who has shown that we can build testing capacity. We can sequence. Hundreds of countries, like almost 200 countries, are now sequencing, right? So we have shown that all of these things that we never thought could be possible is possible. And discussions on IP waivers, discussions on more petty donations from the richest countries will only take us so far. We will be stuck in the same vicious cycle. So I think really, as we continue thinking about interventions, access to essential medicines like vaccines, we need to invest on capacity to manufacture our own vaccines. Look at what we have done with diagnostic and sequencing. So I have no doubt that if we get together, if our countries and governments decide to invest on research, to invest on science, industries, then we can indeed make a difference. Look at what India is doing, right? How much Serum Institute is the biggest vaccine manufacturer in the world. Whether we admit it or not, most children in this world after birth are vaccinated by vaccines made by an industry in India. So it's definitely possible. And what we need to be careful about is when we invest in technology, not technologists, technology, we have to be careful that we invest on the newest technologies. We shouldn't be, for example, if we still are trying to make inactivated vaccines, for example, that will only go so far. But if we ensure that we're investing on, let's say, the mRNA technology, building that ourselves, we will go much, much further. And there will be newer technologies that will come in, and we need to keep that in mind too. We have to make the best utilization of the optimal resources we have. But I do strongly believe that it is possible. We have the people to be able to do it. We just need to get together and break these barriers. But as we try to do this, there are many, many systematic barriers that we also face in our countries. And I think that's important to acknowledge too. Because when we're talking about vaccines and becoming independent, we cannot do that without acknowledging the systematic barriers that exist in countries like ours, that exist in practicing science in our countries, right? We have issues with region supply. No companies will come and make an office in Bangladesh. We have distributors, middlemen, who can charge whatever they want. Our regions, and I'm sure a lot of you have experience with that, our regions are stuck in customs for weeks, if not months. We need additional infrastructure. These machines, they were never made to work in hot, humid, dusty cities like Dhaka, one of the most populated cities in the world. But I really think, again, coming back to my point, none of these challenges are insurmountable with dedication and activism. I think it's so important that as scientists in countries like us, we not only practice science, but we are also activists, that we fight for equity, for ensuring that we have equitable access to the practice and benefits of science. When we talk about access to supplies, what happens when we don't have access to supplies? It takes away money, it takes away time, and it really leads to wasted motivation of the youngest scientists. Access to scholarly literature. We have to pay to publish, we have to read to publish, and I think that's very unfair, because all the work that we do is pretty much either philanthropically funded or publicly funded. So what we are doing as a group with many other collaborators across the world is trying to bring attention to this fact, and Brazil itself is doing such an amazing job in talking about these things and trying to bring these things to the surface. And something that Ricardo and I were talking about right at the beginning is access to language and how everything in the literature is in English, but we don't speak English. That's not our first language. So how do we break that barrier? I think it's really important. I know Brazil has a lot of journals in your language. Bangladesh doesn't. Many other countries don't. I think there's a lot to learn for other countries from Brazil, and perhaps also thinking about how do we ensure that international journals also have ways of publishing the same articles in various languages. I mean, it's done in French. Why not in Portuguese? Why not in Bangla or Hindi? Why do we want to do all of this? We want to do all of this because we want to close the 1090 gap. So in public health, there's this concept called the 1090 gap. It means that 10% of the resources exist when 90% of the children die. So every dot in this globe represents 10,000 deaths. And in green, I'm showing you where the technologies are. And we see there is this massive disparity where the children die and where there's the best technologies. And till we are able to overcome this, I don't think there is much we can do to go forward. At the end of the day, the responsibility is ours, of the global South. We need to get out of this colonial global health and look at public health in our context as we move forward. And, I always advocate for science by and for the many, not the few. And I think COVID-19 has really given us the opportunity to empower, engage, educate, to intercept the colonial world and to ensure that everyone in the world has equal access to practice and benefits of science. With that, thank you so much. And I'm so sorry for the disruption in between.
Thank you, Senjuti, first of all, apologies for my small delay. I was in an endless meeting, but very important. I couldn't leave, so I came in a little bit late. Sorry for that. But I'm really touched by your talk, and I want to congratulate you for this talk and also for your work. I couldn't start telling you how much I agree with every word you have said. I loved your equity reality slide. This is really, really very enlightening and very clear. It couldn't be more clear. So thank you for that. Thank you for showing us, for showing your work and your data. It's unbelievable that it took 21 years for Bangladesh to incorporate the vaccine. I made a very quick math, and this means that 60,000 preventable deaths could have been averted. So it's really unbelievable. So if you have some more minutes to stay with us, is that okay if we?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So how do you think we could change that in our country, in Brazil? Because when you were disrupted, we were discussing among us, for example, we have a good information system in Brazil. As you, we have good scientists. As you, we have the willingness. We have activists. But for example, we don't have an NGO like yours, and really congratulations for your work. It's unbelievable. This is an excellent example for the world, I think. My questions for you are, where do your funds come from? And how can we learn for the Brazilian activism to implement something like that?
Right. Very, very good questions. And thank you so much for the kind words. I have a lot of colleagues in Brazil, and I think Brazil is doing an absolutely fabulous work, especially the universities that's in Sao Paulo, and the scientists over there are just excellent. And despite that, I think we're falling behind, and I think there's several reasons for that in the global South as a whole. A is our mindset. I think our mindset is still so colonial. I'll tell you about Bangladesh. We have been basically under the British Empire for so long that our mindset is set such that we are not good enough. You have to be white to be good enough. If you go into our airport, there's actually a separate door for foreigners to enter so that they don't have to wait in line. If you have a British or a Canadian passport, you become more important. And the same thing is translated to research. Many of our scientists will rather work with a foreigner with no experience than with a very, very experienced and smart local scientist. I think that is something we really need to change. We don't collaborate amongst ourselves because there is so much talent, so much brilliance within our countries, and people are so dedicated. If we worked together within countries and even between countries, I think we would be able to break a lot of these barriers. Now, coming back to funding, specifically asked where we get our funding from, not from Bangladesh at all. We do not get any national support when it comes to research. We are mainly funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We're funded by WHO for some of our surveillance work, and the German government, the British government to some extent, and also sometimes some pharmaceutical companies, depending on the projects. It's a variety of sources.
So on that, I would like to comment that we really need to go for a South-South collaboration and get independent from the international technology. I mean, it's unbelievable that before COVID, you had to send your samples to a northern country. This is incredible. But we need independence on technology and on funding. And on that, I would like to comment with you that the BRICS countries have constituted a network. And this is a network not only of a TB, tuberculosis. I work with TB. So we have constituted not only a research network, but also a government TB network. And the BRICS countries sponsor research on TB for the BRICS country. And that I think it's really important because, and we should start to think how we can expand that to other southern countries. We cannot stay dependent of donations of Gates and of the British or German countries, because they have another agenda and they will open competitions for their agenda, not necessarily our agendas.
Annette, I could not agree more to what you're saying. Absolutely. The funding structure is absolutely not fair. And, we have this joke that when we work with the Gates Foundation, we are doing more progress calls than research because we have to provide them with the data.
Sure.
So you're absolutely right. Their agenda, they always have an agenda. And, it's also times like we are funded for, let's say, a study or a surveillance for 18 months, for 2 years. And how do you do surveillance for 2 years on infectious diseases? But for them, the data need to make to their annual reports. They need to show that they have changed something somewhere. So I absolutely agree. And, I'm so happy to hear about this consortium or this group that you've brought, that you are working in with TB. That is something that is very poor in South Asia. So pretty much every other part of the country work as blocks. right? Southern America or Europe or Africa, let's say there's an African CDC. South Asia is politically very divided. We don't like each other much, despite having very similar cultural backgrounds. We do not collaborate. Sometimes, like if we are doing research in 3 different countries, like we did this research study that included Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. And because of the political nature or the political relationship between India and Pakistan, we could never meet either in India or in Pakistan. We always had to go to a third country to meet. And that makes research so difficult. And it's a waste of time and whatever resources we have. And I think these are things that we should be asking ourselves, that wouldn't we be much, much stronger together if we worked together and forgotten about the differences we have now.
Also about the language you have, because the other day David Dowdy, who you might know well, he's a modeler in Johns Hopkins University and also works with TB/HIV. He did a small survey asking some researchers what they think are the main barriers to progress on TB knowledge and TB elimination. And we had 50 words to answer, and I managed to squeeze the language problem among the barriers, because I also agree completely with you. Well, your English is very, very good, but for sure, language is a barrier. Our students not always understand well English. This is one of the reasons we want to promote international webinars. We want people to start to be acquainted and used to hear and maybe discuss in English. And also when you go to a conference, you can see people from everywhere in the world struggling to make a good conference when we know that those people would be brilliant conferences and speakers in their own language. So I don't know exactly, you gave a very good possible solution. We need journals in our language, but we also need the translation of the published literature in English, because people are publishing in English, and we need to go along with. We also need, as you say, people. We need to be able to publish without paying for publishing or for translating our work. So this is something we should also, I think we should also discuss more among us, among researchers in the South.
Right. So here I will add something. So in some of the committees and groups, the barrier to language is being discussed. And you're absolutely right. It's not only about even going forward. All the literature that we have should be translated. And some journals are actually actively trying to do it. For example, the British Medical Journal of Global Health. Over there, if anybody with their English article also wants to submit a translation of the article as a supplementary, it's allowed. And I think that things like this, but many people don't know this. So these should be advertised, and in some cases, perhaps made mandatory. Because, you know, people doing the research, writing the papers will be at the best place to translate their research. So PLOS Global Public Health just launched, and we're also having discussions over there. One experience I have is something similar to what you were saying about the survey. So we did a survey in our NGO, you know, because we want our kids, students, researchers to also learn English. So we would have all of these weekly meetings in English. But we saw that someone came and presented, but the 30 people attending did not ask many questions. So we did a survey of what would increase their participation? Would language be a barrier? And most of them, majority said, if it was presented in Bangla, I would be more enthusiastic to come. It was presented in Bangla, I would like speak better and I would ask questions. And we changed it. We were like, you know what? Forget teaching English. First, let's get people interested in science. So we changed our mode of presentation, and the meetings are so much more interactive. Initially, we used to have empty chairs. Now people stand and sit on the floor to listen just because it's in Bangla. So we actually published this in Lancet Global Health, and the editor was so kind. It was her idea, and she said, why don't you also publish a supplement in Bangla of what you found? So
you were giving a great idea. I think we should do that for any paper we publish in English in any great journal, you know, wherever we are publishing, we should submit a supplement in our own language. It's a very good idea, and we should, you know, force them to start thinking of that. Very, very nice.
And you know, some journals are going to say no, oh, we don't have space or whatever. But if we all try to do it, if we all push the journals, there is no way they can say no. They will be bound to say yes, but we all need to do this. We need to be together in this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Ricardo, do you want to go ahead, please?
No, just thank you for the wonderful talk and for sharing your experience through the pandemic and COVID. I think it's amazing how you guys managed to do sequencing of COVID along with testing. Like sequencing was an extra work that you guys did, and I read somewhere that most people who do the sequencing project were from Bangladesh. You didn't have any foreigners, so you're living proof. You're living proof of how if you guys cooperate and work together, you can be self-sufficient and manage to do this work. I'm sure that I read that Bangladesh was instrumental during the smallpox vaccination eradication. Like you guys produced your own vaccines, but you don't produce your vaccines anymore, even though you have India, your neighbor, who is a major producer of vaccines, and Thailand just signed a contract with I think AstraZeneca to produce their vaccines. What do you think is the main barrier to making Bangladesh self-sufficient and more autonomous with this kind of things? Is it investment in public health, investment in health? I think one of the papers that you wrote with Madhu about what you can learn from the COVID is that Bangladesh invests about 2.3% of their GDP in health, or more or less something like that. What do you think it needs to be done to overcome this? Not only awareness of people of the government investing in health, but also making Bangladesh more self-sufficient. Sorry, it's a
difficult question.
No, it's a really, really good question. And I'm so happy you read that paper. Like, this is like Madhu's and my first work together. We were super excited about it.
Yeah. I recommend. I'll send it to Annette.
So I think in terms of vaccine production, there are barriers are manifold. There is, of course, international barriers, right? As we are seeing now, a lot of international companies, pharmaceutical companies will not want local vaccination. So there are some politics over there for sure. And we are seeing that with just like big pharma, for example. What are we seeing with smoking? right? The cigarette industry. I think there are some similarities over there. Then, of course, there are some barriers within the country. As you said, our Bangladesh government invests about 2% or a little over on research. That's very little. Or on health, that's very, very little. I think a lot more investments need to be made if we really want to become self-sufficient. So there were all of this infrastructure in the Institute of Public Health, which is a government institute actually, who produced vaccines not only for us, but also for not only for the country, but also for the entire region during smallpox eradication, as we just discussed. But all of those were shut down, and that might just have been local pharmacies, because it's not only about international, but it's also the local politics, what the pharmaceutical industries within the country want, etc. There is also barriers to acceptance, right? Mm-hmm. When we become really, really used to importing products, let's say from America or for Germany, people sometimes within our countries just trust that better for no good reason. Just like, we don't like buying generic drugs. So I think there are many barriers, but once we get started on production, those are small barriers that we have to fight as a country. And it's going to be different for every country, right?
Yes.
I believe the world has to fight together. You have shown that brilliantly in your lecture. I think that there's no reason why we don't have manufacturers of the COVID vaccine in every corner of the planet. It's unacceptable, and I think that unfortunately this is something the pandemic we have not learned from the pandemic. We should have learned how unprepared we were, and how we need more solidarity among the countries. The numbers you have shown of vaccination are unbelievable. It also makes me wonder. Fortunately in Brazil we are progressing well, slowly but well, in terms of vaccination, because we only have 83% of our population who is eligible for the vaccine, and we already have 76% of the whole population, which means over 90% of the eligible population vaccinated with the first dose. So we think
excellent.
That's very good. Yeah, we are progressing, but it's unbelievable that we have not learned with that. And I also find it unbelievable that there are people in such privileged countries that do not want to get vaccinated or are protesting against mandatory vaccination. This is also, for me, it's a nonsense and an absence of understanding of what the world is and what our privileges are.
Yes.
So thank you so much for showing us all that.
Thank you.
And I think you were right when you say that, COVID just made us look through a lens to magnify what is already known and true for other problems in the world of nurture and go ahead. Sorry.
Not only mirrors but magnifies all the problems that we have.
Yeah, sure. It unveils and it magnifies the problems. Yeah, because sure, inequity, not only on health, but all kinds of inequity is so clear now, and it's the gap is increasing. Do the students have any? Do you want to speak up. Do we have any questions on YouTube, Ricardo?
No, I think I summarized some questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like something that I have as I am growing in this field, as I'm learning more in this field, I'm realizing that I don't know if it is all human beings, but at least as scientists, we do not learn from history. And I am not sure we will act very differently during the next outbreak or the next pandemic. We always try to pretend like, we will do everything from scratch, but we don't need to. So much we already know and we can learn from. But no, there has to be like novelty in everything. And I think oftentimes just searching for that novelty makes us fail.
Yeah, I think there's a saying that all novelty is but oblivion. All right. It was very nice having you with us and sharing your.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much.
And we try to send all other students our link. I can send you the link to the YouTube if you want to share with some people, or some of your students, or some people over there. And thank you again. Thank you, Annette, for helping and participating as well.
My pleasure, my privilege.
Thank you
so much.
And thank you everyone on YouTube for watching us, and thank you. I'll see you when we have our next session on global health topics. We invite you again. We have one that we talk about child and maternal health. I think you'll be a good guest speaker talking about child health and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Sorry for anything for the reason, and have a good weekend. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Good night.
Bye.
Good day.